What a completely normal family. I'm sure they're happy and definitely not all dead. But I can't help but think we're missing someone. Who could it be? Oh yeah. Mrs. Afton is a very unknown figure. She's so unknown in fact that the only title we can give her is Mrs. Afton. So we're here to find out more about her. The biggest problem is that she doesn't really exist. And if she does, then the game has a really bad way of showing it. She's never made an actual appearance in the series, so she's clearly not important. But just look at the most recent games. Cassie's dad may end up being the bunny bully, and nobody was thinking about him. Maybe Mrs. Afton will show up in the next few games as the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment or something. So let's get a head start and figure out where she went. Step into my office. A bit closer. Just a bit closer. Perfect. Okay, now here's how this is going to work. I am going to go over 3 different theories, and then after, decide what the chances of those theories being true are. But before that, we need to take a look at the timeline. Man, this thing is a mess. Because first, we need to find out when Mrs. Afton leaves. Unfortunately, since we know nothing about Mrs. Afton, we're going to have to use every theorist's favorite word. Assumption. Since we never see her at all, or any reference to her in FNAF 4, I think we can at the very least say she doesn't live there anymore. Therefore, we can probably mark her down as having left the Afton family in about 1983, around the same time as the crying child died. Now, on to Theory 1, and Theory 1 is... divorce! Yay! A pretty popular theory is that Mrs. Afton got divorced and hightailed it out of there to get away from William. A pretty smart decision in hindsight, and it does make sense in certain areas. You can even line up the divorce happening around the same time that crying child died to William's animatronics. Sounds simple enough, right? But it's not. Listen, I'd like to believe that she divorced William, took the settlement money, and then relaxed on a private beach for the rest of her life, but let's get serious. This is William Afton we're talking about. I mean, hey, maybe he was a real nice guy to his wife, but if the rest of his family is anything to go by, I don't know about that. There's also the fact that, you know, she has 2 other kids. You're telling me she just left them behind? Especially after one of her kids already died to the last project her husband made? I suppose a reason could be that she had no choice but to leave them behind. Let's say Mrs. Afton did get a divorce and wanted to take Elizabeth and Michael with her. Would the known egomaniac and psycho William let that happen? I'll give you 5 seconds to answer. No, obviously. William was a respected businessman. It's not hard to believe he used his influence to get custody. He might have even used it to stop her from seeing the kids at all. From there, it's pretty easy and sad to imagine how it went after that. Losing the right to see your kids, with the other dying in a tragic way, it was too much for her to handle, and she sadly passes away. Alone. Forgotten. I bet you're thinking that's a pretty plausible theory, but here's the problem. Everything I just said was completely made up.
No way. We got you. Not a chance. Not this time. It never happened.
Everything is not confirmed and therefore not real. We basically just created fanfiction. There's not even any proof that William Afton was married. No wedding pictures, no ring, nothing. For all we know, he gave birth to those kids himself. That's what theories are, fanfiction. Doesn't mean it can't be true. I'll put this one down as a solid 45% chance. I guess I should mention this as well, but in Security Breach, there are CDs where Vanessa talks with her therapist, and some of the CDs include some interesting conversation, most notably about her relationship with her mother and her father and their divorce. And a lot of what they say can be used to back up this theory, but the CDs also give you more questions than answers. It's mentioned later on that everything Vanessa said was a complete lie. These CDs might also be a reference to Michael, but that doesn't really make much sense, so like any good theorist, I'm going to completely ignore it. Theory 2. Mrs. Afton was murdered, or kidnapped, or died, or Thanos snapped. Basically, she disappeared. I'm going to bundle these all together and tie them with a big bow, since while they're different, the outcome for all of them is basically the same. This is basically just, she died, lol, the theory. And the theory is quite straightforward. It goes that William murdered his wife, probably because she was getting ready to up and leave him, and his ego was not going to let that happen, and that kickstarts his life of murder. Some people even think that the grave in Midnight Motorist is hers, and that after William killed her, he buried her back here. Others think that this is her, sitting in the chair, and I guess. But this could be anyone, from Gru to The Rock. I mean, this theory, it's alright.
It's alright, like...
It feels like low-hanging fruit. William's a killer, so he killed her. I mean, sure, that definitely could have happened, but it sounds like the most boring outcome. This theory sounds pretty good when you first hear it, but after a while, it starts to show more cracks. If William had killed her, it would absolutely have been documented somewhere. Especially since the entire franchise is basically made for the guy. If he did kill her, you can bet your left toenail it would be referenced somewhere. In my opinion, this theory is less likely than the last one. But since we are talking about a serial killer, we can't exactly rule it out, so we'll give it a 10% chance. And now we're on to theory 3, maybe the most popular, and definitely the most polarizing. Mrs. Afton is possessing Ballora. This theory was popularized by MatPat, and the gist of it is that Mrs. Afton was killed by William and put in Ballora, or that her remnant was injected into Ballora after she had already died. Either that, or Ballora was built in Mrs. Afton's image. I guess even killers like William get lonely. Let's go down all the evidence for this theory. First, her design. She comes across as a motherly figure, when she's not trying to kill you, that is. And when you compare her to the other animatronics, she does stand out. The only other one that stands out is Baby. And would you look at that? Elizabeth is possessing Baby. Huh? The fact she shows up in Sister Location, which contains references to every single Afton in this series, means it would make sense if she showed up here too. But the biggest piece of evidence by far would be this. In Security Breach, you can find a room where there's a bunch of staff bots sitting around a table, and if you look close enough, you start to see some similarities. Like how one looks like Baby, or how one's missing a head, or how one looks like Ballora. Because of this, you can assume that the other two are William and Michael, and funnily enough, this is probably the closest we get to a Mrs. Afton. I mean, look at all this evidence. She has to be Ballora, right? Uh-oh. The same way there's evidence for this theory, there's evidence against it too. If she really was possessing Ballora, wouldn't she recognize Michael? You know, her son? Okay, maybe not recognize, but she would definitely have something to say, right? Baby uses Elizabeth's voice, so why wouldn't Ballora do the same and use Mrs. Afton's voice? And look, I know a lot of people are going to be stuck on the whole staff bot thing, but just because this is here, does that mean we jump the shark and say, yep, good enough, welcome back Mrs. Afton? In my eyes, nah. If you're thinking they wouldn't put this here for no good reason, then please take a seat. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but there are a lot of things that have absolutely no payoff. The random missing children, the Glamrock's personalities, Vanny, Glitch Trap, like 3 of the endings. It's obvious that they were things put here for the sake of having them there. Honestly, just look at this like a TV show that got cancelled before the story went anywhere. I'd say this theory is about as convincing as the first one, so I'll give it a 45% chance too. And yeah, that's basically it. I guess we have to talk about that, huh?
Clara, I tell you, the baby isn't mine.
I hate this show. There's a popular theory that this show's main characters, Clara and Vlad, are stand-ins for Mr. and Mrs. Afton. It's so popular that people even call Mrs. Afton by the name Clara. And I guess I see why. The story is about a terrible father who wears purple, and we all know purple is such an Afton color. Some people take it to mean that it's William denying that Michael is his son, and sure, it could mean that, but it could also mean a lot of other things. This doesn't have much to do with why Mrs. Afton disappeared, so I'm going to stick my fingers in my ears and pretend this doesn't exist. Only one man knows what this means, and he ain't gonna tell us anytime soon. So for now, we're just gonna have to guess. It's fun to speculate, but the truth is that it's been 10 years, and the closest thing we have to Mrs. Afton is a staff bot in a blue wig. Those are all the theories I have. Honestly, just pick whichever one you like the most. That's the fun way of doing it. I hope you enjoyed our time together. And listen, you can trust every single word I say. Would I lie to you? Oh, and before I forget. Huh?
Officer, you are under arrest for illegal law distribution. Come out with your hands up.
You'll never take me alive.